Hi, boys and girls. Miss Kathy here from Shaler North Hills Library, and we are doing another incredible African American STEAM person here in February, which is African American Month. And STEAM has to do with things that relate to science or technology, engineering, arts, or music. That's how you spell STEAM, S-T-E-A-M. So we have Superheroes of STEAM program number 3, I think. Number 4. And today we are going to learn about the vast wonder of the world, biologist Ernest Everett Just. Ernest Everett Just. So someone you've probably never heard of. I never had. And this is a really incredible picture book that tells you about his life. So let's read this one together. And then we have some neat stuff to do at the end. Woods Hole, Massachusetts, 1911. At twilight, a man lay on a dock luring marine worms with a lantern. He scooped them out with his net and placed them in a bucket. He couldn't wait to look at them more closely. He knew the ways of the sea, though he was not a fisherman. His grandfather had built wharves, but he was not a dock worker. His name was Ernest Everett Just, and he was a scientist. Ernest was not like other scientists. He saw the whole where others saw only parts. He noticed details others failed to see. On the dock at dawn, he wrote poetry. Let's go a bit more this way. Back in his laboratory, Ernest examined the marine worms under the microscope. He recorded and sketched their movements. How do their tiny egg cells create new life? He wondered. At a time when few expected a black man to do so well, Ernest became the world authority on how life begins from an egg. From early on, Ernest wondered about the world of water around him. Born in, in Charleston, South Carolina, where rivers and oceans meet, Ernest watched how fishermen net their catch. He learned how to read from his schoolteacher mother. After his father died when he was 4, he learned how hard life could be. To find better paying work, Ernest's mother moved their family from the city across the river to the country. Soon after, Ernest caught typhoid fever. He survived, but he had lost his ability to read. He cried alone, struggling to relearn it all. Then one day, a miracle! Ernest could read again. He read as often as he could, letting his imagination roam. Words came to life as magical spirits. Imagine knowing how to read and then losing the ability to do it. Must have been horrible. Ernest attended the school his mother created. In the town she also established. Ernest's mother never stopped working. Ernest never stopped observing, even while cooking, cleaning, and watching his younger brother and sister. He observed how a hurricane damaged their school, how tougher segregation laws restricted African Americans, and how his mother's remarriage changed life at home. What Ernest really loved to observe, though, was nature. Surrounded by rivers and ocean, marsh and mud, he found plenty to explore. At 13, Ernest left home to attend boarding school in Orangeburg, South Carolina. It was here he published his first poem. When he graduated, Ernest returned home hoping to begin teaching in his mother's school, but a fire had destroyed it. Ernest left the segregated South on a steamship to continue his education up north. He dove into his new classes at a college preparatory school in New Hampshire. While he was away, his mother fell ill with tuberculosis and died. Ernest was stunned. Full of grief and confusion, Ernest did the only thing he knew to do: return to his studies. So now he's lost both his mom and his dad. He went on to Dartmouth College, working to pay his own way and to support his brother and sister back home. With less time to study, Ernest failed a class. He thought of his family and how they depended on him. He thought of his mother's hard work and belief in education. He had to keep going. Ernest took a biology class and his life changed forever. In that class, he discovered the microscopic world of the cell. Scientists knew that the cell is the smallest building block of life, but many had only a basic understanding of how the different parts of the cell worked together as new life developed. Ernest wanted to unlock this mystery. And he did. Ernest became a biology professor at Howard University in Washington, D.C., teaching students to question and observe. Each summer, he traveled to the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, to research and experiment. Out on the collecting boat, Ernest looked for sea urchins, sand dollars, starfish, and marine worms. He then carefully transported them to the lab in a covered bucket so the beating sun would not damage them. Most scientists carelessly removed sea animals to study, but Ernest demonstrated that by observing living animals in as natural an environment as possible, they could learn more. Ernest also taught scientists how to thoroughly cleanse glassware and equipment for the most accurate experiments. Using a simple light microscope, Ernest examined the egg cells of all those sea animals night after night, day after day. While observing sand dollar eggs, Ernest noticed a wave of movement when a sperm contacted the egg. As slight as a shiver, it signaled an amazing discovery. The egg cell directed its own development during fertilization. That's the process of a new being created, the egg and the sperm uniting. This controversial idea went against what most scientists thought at the time. It wasn't just the sperm creating changes. The cell surface and the layer right below it were just as important in generating new life. There's different diagrams showing the way new life is created out of a single egg cell and a sperm. And the branches, it starts out as just one and it branches out into two completely separate cells and then eventually into four. Ernest published his research findings in many scientific papers. He traveled to conferences to share his ideas, and he won the first NAACP Spingarn Medal. As his reputation grew, Ernest's ideas caught the attention of scientists around the world. He was the first American research scientist invited to the world-famous Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, Germany. From then on, Ernest worked in Europe as often and as long as he could, enjoying more warmth and respect than he'd ever felt in America because of the segregation that existed here. Despite his accomplishments, Ernest felt increasingly stifled in the United States. His family was not welcome with him in Massachusetts because of the color of their skin. He struggled for basic laboratory equipment at Howard. He didn't have the freedom white scientists had to choose where they worked. The time came when Ernest refused to tolerate the segregation any longer. He decided to move to France and become an independent researcher. Crossing the Atlantic, Ernest thought about the hundreds of students he'd introduced to science and how his fascination with cells began. He poured those memories and feelings into his work and completed a groundbreaking book. Through his careful observations and hard work, Ernest opened up the wonder of the universe to all of us through a tiny egg cell. And that is actually the end of the book. It gives some quotes from him just in his own words, it says here. If I can give the boys and girls a scientific start, it will help them in whatever they may do later. That was one. Live with the true, and when you are ready to embark on life's unknown waters, place yourself at the helm, confident of but one destination: success. Environment and organism are one. Environment and organism are one. Neither can be separated from the other. Have to be looked at together. Life is not only a struggle against the surroundings from which life came, it is also a cooperation with them. And life is exquisitely a time thing, like music. And then it tells more about his life. And there is a picture of him in 1921. It says he came to prefer working in Europe, where scientists encouraged his unique approach to biology, which included philosophy, that's the study of like how you think, and science. Each time he sighted the Statue of Liberty when he returned from Europe, Ernest would say, "This is where my liberty ends," because he faced so much discrimination here in the United States. There's a lot of small print at the back here. He eventually settled in France, where he encountered new hardships while he was working on the article he was writing. The German army invaded. The Nazis captured and held Ernest at a detainment camp. That means they kept him as a prisoner for a short while and then released him. So then he had to flee Europe and return to the U.S., but then the next year he had suffered a lot when the Nazis had him. At the age of 58, he died from cancer. But he influenced many other scientists and has done incredible work. It tells you more about his science and notes from the illustrator. So there are lots of things to read at the back of this book. It gives you a definition page to a glossary that defines different words that I may have used that you may not be familiar with. Gives some more successes and tells you some other places they got information. So that is the vast wonder of the world about Dr. Just, a biologist. And then, hopefully you were able to print out the packet of papers that goes along with this. It says there are some sites to look at first to meet the illustrator and see pictures of Just Homestead and others. So you can see other work that the person who drew the pictures in this book, which I thought were pretty amazing, has done. And you get to see some pictures of the research they did of Just's homestead, where he lived and grew up, and some other aspects of his life. Learn more about Just's history. You can learn about what is biology. Tells you a little bit, if you don't even know what a biologist is or what biology is, it is basically the study of life, but you can learn about it at Biology for Kids. And there is a site, Mop Top's Shop, which has a lot of information about other African American scientists. And we may actually be reading about some more of them in the future. I'm not sure who we're going to do yet. You can make a candy DNA model, a tasty little experiment, because DNA is the basis, like the roadmap of your cells and how you are formed, how you grow up. And then there are 2 experiments that we are actually going to watch. I started performing them a day ago, actually 2 days, and you need to do them in a couple different phases. So we're going to go down and film some of those. And a word search was at the back of this packet. Black scientists. So you can see Ernest Everett Just is the one listed on the very first column there. And then there are many others. Maybe if you're a little bit older, you would like to do some research on your own on some of those people. People that experimented and did wonderful things to advance science. Okay, so lots of things to check out on the computer. And a word search to find. It's got a lot of letters there, so hopefully you're able to find some of those, and some of those names are very long. So you'd have to find the first name and the last name, both. And now we're going to go move to the site where we have our pieces of the experiment so we can see what we're doing with that. So stay tuned. The rest of this video will have the rest of our presentation. See you real soon. Hi. So we are doing the experiment part after reading about Ernest Just. And we are doing an experiment using osmosis with eggs, because that is what Just worked on a lot, was developing how an egg and a sperm unite. So he is working with eggs a lot, so we can work with eggs. And osmosis is something you may not be familiar with. It means osmosis is a movement of water from a less concentrated solution to a more concentrated solution. And it's the water that's moving. So what we did to experiment with this is use some eggs. And I soaked these in vinegar. Eggs have a semi-permeable shell on them, and a semi-permeable exterior, but we got to get rid of the shell that doesn't let anything through. So we had to soak the shell in vinegar, and that makes it come off. You can see what I used was brown eggs, and I just want to show you there's nothing wrong with the egg. It's just the brown stuff rubs off as opposed to using a white egg. This is what it ended up looking like, but it doesn't really matter as far as our experiment goes. I'll take some of that brown stuff off, but what we're going to do now is put 2 different eggs that I soaked and took the shell off of. Now that part takes at least a day to do. You have to have at least a day to soften the shell. All you do is put it in a glass with some vinegar. That's all you need to do. It's very easy. You leave it sit there. Might take 2 days. Mine weren't quite done by the next day, so I left it sit another day. It tells you on this website some ways you can speed up the process if you want. But I wasn't in any particular hurry, so I just let it go on its own. And then I'm going to put this into one of these glasses here. This one I have marked with a P, that's for just plain water. And this is a glass with water in it and several tablespoons of sugar dissolved into it. So we're going to put one of these eggs in the glass of plain water, and as you can see, it is sinking to the bottom. Okay, let me take some of the brown off of this one here so they look similar, but they are very squishy and soft. If you do this experiment, they kind of have a neat feel to them. So take some of the brown off here, then I'm going to drop that in the sugar solution. I think I put 2 tablespoons of sugar into this glass jar. Let's see what happens when we put that one in there. Woo! You can see, there it is on the bottom. And I think if we add even more sugar to the glass, it might actually end up floating. Let's see. I'm going to take this back out and add some more sugar to it and see if we can get it to actually float. So I'm going to have my camera person zoom in on this egg there for 1 second while I go get some more sugar. And we'll see if we can get it a little bit more dense so that it actually floats. If it doesn't, that doesn't affect the experiment, because that's not what we're testing, whether the egg floats or not. We're testing the movement of water from inside the egg to outside the egg, because it is more concentrated outside and less inside. So the water molecules will move so that they are equal on both sides of the semi-permeable outer layer of egg. So let's drop this in there now and see what happens. And you can see we just needed to add a little bit more sugar to that glass, and it is floating in the water because it is so dense with the sugar in it that it holds it up. But again, that's only part of the experiment here. We are going to see how they look in another day. See if there's any difference between the egg in sugar water and the egg in plain water. Now I did this other experiment that I gave you the directions for, and this is talking about a bouncy egg experiment. This was just kind of a fun one. It doesn't have to do with osmosis, but we took the egg shell off, and I was going to show you how it looks when it's in the vinegar. It gets bubbles all of it, and it keeps bubbling a little bit. I can still see 1 or 2 coming off, and that's the reaction between the vinegar and the outer layer of the egg. Now, for some reason, this one may have even cracked, but we're going to take it out of the shell, and all the skin is off. I'm going to put it in that bowl there, and we are going to see if we can get these guys to bounce. Did you ever think of egg? These are not hard-cooked eggs. These are raw eggs. Did you ever think you'd see an egg bounce? I'm going to take some of the brown. Whoops! Well, there, that one kind of bounced, didn't it? Right into the glass. I'm going to take some of the brown off this like we did the other eggs. But I did it with 2 different types of eggs to see if it matters which one bounces better. We have a brown egg that you can clearly tell by the skin, so we'll leave part of that skin on there so you can see the difference. And we have a white egg. Now, this white egg does appear like it cracked on the bottom. I'm not sure how. So that might very likely affect the bounce capability of this egg. Poor little guy has a crack in it. But let's try it with the brown egg first. I'm not going to drop it from very high because I don't really know what's going to happen. Not having done this before, this is a first time experiment. So I don't want it to crack and go all over the table or anything. So let's see if it'll bounce from this height here. No, that did not bounce. It may have to do with the surface of the pan that I'm using. Let's try another one from a little lower. Maybe if we drop it from higher. You think that would make it bounce? What do you think? My camera person who doesn't want to speak is giving me an eye like, you're not really going to do that, are you? Well, see, it didn't bounce from that high. So that was our experiment. We now have an egg, and we have the shell. Instead of cracking into a lot of pieces like it usually would when you're cracking a raw egg, this one is one big piece. It kind of feels leathery. Okay, so let's try it with the white egg. We learned from that we can't go that high. Now this white egg is already cracked on the bottom, so I'm going to try bouncing it on this part here. Let's see if bouncing it from a little bit lower height affects it. Well, I mean, it wobbles. It didn't actually bounce. That one kind of bounced up a little bit, didn't it? It's hopping around. I don't know if it's actually... Yeah, that was a good one. I'm not going to do it on the cracked end, though. I'm going to keep doing it. But you can see it's very wobbly. It's not going like a bunny rabbit up and down, but it is wobbling around and it is not breaking. Now I can try to get it a little bit higher and see how high we can get it from. This is the white egg. White egg is working better than the brown egg did. And the white egg's cracked to begin with, so must be a difference in the shells. And it could also be different surface area or a different surface that we're bouncing it in. If I were to pour this into here and try bouncing in this tray, maybe it was the harder plastic of this tray that's affecting it. Let's see. Seems to be doing okay so far in this one. I think this is just a little bit better egg we have here, huh? Must be working better with a white egg than the brown. See if we get a little bit higher. That's about the height the brown one broke at, I think. I didn't think I went any higher than that. Ooh, that was a pretty good bounce. Let's try from up here a little bit. My camera person's getting very edgy at this point. Yep, see, that one made it go break. But again, we have the shell is just like a piece of plastic here. So we got about that high with the white egg. We didn't get very high with the brown egg. It wasn't breaking, so I might have gone up a little bit too high to begin with after some initial drops. But you never know with science. You have to experiment and try different things. Maybe it was this surface. That's the one I brought in from my kitchen. So maybe if we had tried a different, maybe a glass plate or something, it would work different. I did try it with 2 different types of eggs, so we could see that difference. But you just have to experiment and try different things, and that's how we learn. But it was kind of fun playing with the squishy egg, too. That has its own merit. So we will check back a day or so later. We're watching these 2 eggs that are soaking in 2 different types of solution, plain water and sugar water. And they had the shells already taken off. And then we will see if anything changes and makes them look any different. So stay tuned. We will have more STEAM superheroes very soon. Hi, boys and girls. Miss Kathy here. We are continuing our experiment with the eggs. So we took the shells off, and then we had to put them in water for at least a day and see what happens to them. So we have our glasses marked. The one with the P is the plain water, and that's the one the egg sank all the way to the bottom in. And this one had the sugar water, and it was much more dense, and it was able to hold the egg up. And it is still not laying on the bottom. So now we are going to take our eggs out and compare the size. First we'll do the one with the plain water. A little bit tricky to get this out here. The egg in the plain water seems to have gotten rather large. Put that down there and we can compare the size then to the one that was in the sugar water. The sugar water solution egg is supposed to have either shrunk or stayed the same size. So you can see that one is larger than the other, the plain water. Why did that happen? Because the dissolved sugar molecules in this glass cannot pass through the membrane of the egg, but the smaller water molecules can. So they try to go from the less concentrated egg solution to the more concentrated sugar and make it the same on both sides. So when that happens, the water is leaving that one and making it shrink, while in the plain water, the water is coming into the egg and making it expand. Now, we're going to do a little experiment here and see if we can make it like a little mini fountain. If we prick the egg with a needle, we should be able to see some of this extra water come shooting out. Let's see here. Whoa, that was, well, I did have to squeeze it because nothing was happening when I first pricked it. It was just slowly leaking. Of course, be warned, it does make a mess on your table. Let's try it with this one and see if we get any different reaction with this one. See, it's not really coming out. I'm going to aim this one down this way. This was the one that shrunk a little bit, so it doesn't want to give up any of its water. I mean, of course, if I make another hole, more holes will make it more likely to leak, probably. There we go. Took a whole bunch of holes in making a smaller, actually round opening instead of just piercing it. But those are some of the experiments you can do with eggs. Just make sure you're ready to clean up. And then you can do other osmosis experiments or other wonderful experiments. We did the bouncy egg one, which ended up a lot like this one did. And we will be back another week with another Superheroes of Steam presentation. Stay tuned to see who we will do next time. This has been Miss Kathy from Shaler North Hills Library. Bye.